Alien Romulus breathed new fire into the Alien universe, and what Fede Alvarez did with that movie will always be remembered. You may know that the film is set between the first two Alien movies, but what you might not be aware of is just how many levels Romulus takes inspiration from Alien and Aliens on. In fact, all the other Alien movies have also contributed to Romulus, of course in varying degrees. We will definitely be talking about all the callbacks, references, and Easter eggs, but this list of 50 insane facts about Alien Romulus has many other wild tidbits as well. It's shaping up to be a fantastic video, but before we begin, please consider hitting those like and subscribe buttons. Those 2 small clicks from you will help us tremendously in bringing you more of these marvelous videos in the future. And now, let's jump into 50 insane facts about Alien Romulus. The Chronology. If this franchise was famous for just one thing, it would probably be its timeline. And that's why we thought we'd clarify it once and for all. Alien Romulus takes place in the year 2142, which places it between Ridley Scott's 1979 Alien, which is set in the year 2122, and James Cameron's Aliens from 1986, which was set in the year 2179. That's not confusing at all, right? Now, Alien Earth is set in the year 2120, which places it before the original by 2 years, but after Ridley Scott's later sequels. So if you're wondering about a chronology or watch order, here it is. First, we have Prometheus, 2012, set in 2093, which is followed by Alien Covenant, from 2017, which was placed in the year 2104. Then comes 2025's Alien Earth, set in the year 2120. Then comes the original Alien from 1979, followed by Alien Romulus in 2025. Then next up there's Aliens and Aliens 3, both of which are set in the same year. And finally, there's Alien Resurrection, 1997, which takes place in 2381. Fede Alvarez brought back the original artists for his movie. Fede Alvarez wanted his Alien film to feel rooted in the same world as Aliens, so he went straight to the source. That is, the effects veterans who had helped bring James Cameron's creatures to life. Whenever possible, the production leaned on practical sets, animatronic creatures, and miniatures, with VFX added later to enhance rather than replace. The animatronic work was handled by 2 studios with deep ties to the franchise. Legacy Effects, which worked out of Stan Winston Studios, carried the DNA of Aliens itself, while Studio Gillis came from Amalgamated Dynamics, the team behind Alien 3, Alien Resurrection, and the 2 AVP films. The reunion carried a certain poetry. Shane Mahan, who had worked on Aliens decades earlier at Winston's shop, admitted he thought his days with the series were over. So many sequels had gone through other companies, particularly his longtime colleagues Alec Gillis and Tom Woodruff Jr., that he figured the franchise had moved on. But when the call finally came asking Legacy Effects to join Alvarez's project, Mahan didn't hesitate. "Would you be interested in reading the script?" they asked. His answer was, "Yes, I've been waiting 40 years. Alien Isolation's influence on Romulus. Fede Alvarez didn't just look at Ridley Scott's Alien and Cameron's Aliens when shaping Romulus, he also pulled heavily from Alien Isolation from 2014, the survival horror video game that has since earned a reputation for being one of the most faithful expansions of the franchise, at least as far as games are concerned. Alvarez admitted he was playing Isolation around the release of Don't Breathe in 2016 and realized how frightening the series could be if it returned to that suffocating, stripped-down tone. Though it's a game and not a film, the story is canon, and Alvarez wasn't shy about leaning into its aesthetic. The film borrows the game's emergency communication stations, which double as save points, and Alvarez even went so far as to sneak in the distinctive saving sound effect after Rain gives Andy his directive. Furthermore, when the humanoid Xenomorph cracks Rain's helmet, her brief look towards the corner of the glass pretty much looks like the imagery on Isolation's cover art. The ending of Romulus also takes on both the original Alien and the game, with Rain recording a final log as the lone survivor. Even background details are game-inspired, with the emergency phone signaling danger just as they did before every deadly encounter in Isolation. Tyler's signal flares are another direct lift. Amanda Ripley uses them to distract the Xenomorph aboard the Sevastopol, and here, Tyler uses them in the same way to ward off facehuggers. So yeah, Alvarez essentially treated the game as another piece of cinematic canon and carefully but seamlessly injected it into Romulus. The controversy behind Rook and using Ian Holmes' face posthumously. Rook's very presence in Alien Romulus stirred debate before audiences even got to see him on the big screen. His likeness wasn't based on a new actor or a fresh interpretation of the synthetic line. Instead, it came straight from a face cast of Sir Ian Holm made years earlier during Lord of the Rings. Holm, of course, played Ash in the original Alien, the company android who tried to bring back a xenomorph at all costs while considering the crew expendable. Director Fede Alvarez compared the decision to historical biopics where actors wear prosthetics to resemble real people, saying he saw it less as pretending to be Ian Holm and more like makeup doing the work. The push apparently came from Ridley Scott himself, who told Alvarez, "Ash was always the best. He needs to make a comeback." The production reached out to Holm's widow, Sophie de Stempel, for permission. She approved, saying Holm loved the character and would have loved the idea of returning as Ash. Though Holm had declined to reprise Ash for Alien Isolation in 2014, his team clarified that that was due to poor health, not disinterest. Even so, online reactions were mixed. Some celebrated the tribute, while others called it digital necromancy, arguing that using the face of a deceased actor who couldn't consent crossed a line. Alvarez acknowledged the use of AI in creating the illusion, but stressed that the team never intended to recreate Holmes' talent or essence. You see, Rook was a new character, sharing only a face with Ash. From a story perspective, the decision fit neatly into the franchise's lore. Ash's role in Alien hinted at a whole different class of synthetics bred for covert and morally questionable company missions. Rook could be seen as a continuation of that line. He was an android with unshakable loyalty and the same unnerving detachment. Alvarez explained that the animatronic torso, damaged and enhanced with CGI, had always been part of the script. The likeness decision came later after weighing different synthetic designs. Ridley Scott, who had stayed close to Holm over the years, saw it as an elegant callback. He even tied it to the franchise's broader trajectory, comparing Rook's presence to how Blade Runner introduced replicants like Roy Batty. These were beings that blurred the line between human, machine, and something in between. Romulus was not supposed to be an alien movie. Intriguingly, director Alvarez never really wanted the movie to be popularized as an alien movie. In fact, his original plan was to produce it in utter secrecy and release the finished product with a title no way close to the Alien franchise. That way, audiences wouldn't even know that they were going to watch an Alien movie until they actually started watching it and spotted a Xenomorph or some other in-universe cue. However, this plan never saw the light of day because marketing an Alien movie without revealing an Alien movie would have been, well, impossible. At least they would have never had the same viral outcome. So, this new installment of the popular franchise was titled Romulus. Furthermore, it wasn't a secret for long because even before things were officially revealed, the title, as well as quite a few production details, had already become public knowledge through behind-the-scenes footage and interviews, which also helped a lot in marketing the movie itself. Another thing we know is that Romulus was initially slated for a release on Hulu, but looking at the massive fan following and buzz, they decided to give the film a theatrical release, and no one could have been happier about that than us. Twitchy fingers and drinking birds. Now, we know that Romulus doesn't upset the canon of the well-established larger Alien universe, right? Well, James Cameron himself is to be thanked in part for this because, according to Alvarez himself, Cameron helped on a script level. Furthermore, Romulus picks up quite a few things from Aliens. For instance, in this movie, Rain is wearing the same Reebok alien stompers that Ripley wore in the second movie. Andy has twitchy fingers because he's basically an outdated and very old synthetic model and has several malfunctions. Now, in Aliens, the android Bishop says that the older synthetic models were a bit twitchy. Furthermore, the entire idea of centering the new film on these young people was actually inspired by the deleted scenes from Cameron's movie that were later brought back in the special edition of Aliens. In one scene, you could see a bunch of kids running around the corridors of Hadley's Hope. In fact, Newt was supposed to be introduced in this scene, and about it, Alvarez said, and we quote, "Wow, what would it be like for those kids to grow up in a colony that still needs another 50 years to terraform? So I remember thinking, if I ever tell a story in that world, I would definitely be interested in those kids when they reach their early 20s. Navarro's Prayer. Before liftoff, Navarro offers a quiet prayer in Mandarin, asking her ancestors to please protect the 5 of us. The translation, however, is kept hidden. The prayer for the 5 people is important because the crew actually numbers 6 if you include Andy. Her words make it clear that, while not openly hostile like Bjorn, she still doesn't see Andy as a real person with a soul. It's a small moment, but one that lands heavily, especially because of Rain's reaction in the background. She clearly understands the language, which also means that Mandarin is a well-spoken language across Weyland-Yutani colonies, but more importantly, she shows disappointment at said prayer by Navarro. She realizes just how few in the group see Andy as more than company equipment. For Rain and Tyler, Andy's a crewmate. For the rest, he's just another tool, no matter how human he might appear. Mythological references! After months of speculation about the subtitle Romulus, Fede Alvarez finally cleared the air when he revealed that it was a direct nod to the Romulus space station where much of the story plays out. There's also a sister station, Remus, tying back to the Roman myth of Romulus and Remus, the twin brothers raised by a wolf who went on to found Rome. In the film, Romulus and Remus are revealed as two halves of the Renaissance space station, with the second half of the story set within Romulus itself. That's why the ship's logo features a wolf standing over two children. The theme of mythology continues with Yvaga, the name of the independent system the protagonists hope to reach. In Guarani, this translates to sky or heaven, though Alvarez describes it more simply as paradise, or the promised land for those desperate to escape Weyland-Yutani's corporatocracy. This choice keeps with the Alien franchise's long-running tradition of mythological naming, the ship Prometheus after the Greek titan who gave fire to humanity, the ship Anisiodora and Apollo computer from Alien Isolation drawn from Roman gods, the planetoid Akron in Aliens named after a river in the Greek underworld, and the USS Auriga in Resurrection, itself a reference to a Greek hero. Apart from this, you can find several references from Joseph Conrad's novels. For instance, the USCSS Nostromo, which was taken from Conrad's Nostromo, A Tale of the Seaboard, a 1904 novel. The Pulse Rifle. One of the most interesting and nostalgic designs in Alien Romulus is the new Pulse Rifle, which deliberately splices the DNA of the original Alien flamethrower with the iconic Pulse Rifle from Aliens. The idea was to create a weapon that felt like a missing link between the two films, since Romulus sits right in the middle of their timeline. The weapon also carries an auto-aim feature, which might sound like a new addition but isn't entirely out of place in the lore. In the special edition of Aliens, Hudson speaks about an independently targeting particle beam, and the smart guns carried by Vasquez and Drake used infrared-assisted targeting. Rain's pulse rifle can easily be read as an early step towards those designs. Weta Workshop, no stranger to futuristic firepower, was tasked with building the new weapons. They'd done guns before for Avatar, but for some of the team, the chance to create a weapon for an Aliens film was a full-circle moment. Joe Dunkley recalled how the guns in Cameron's film left a huge impression on him, the Steadicam-mounted M60-style smart guns especially, and he said the opportunity to design one for Romulus felt special for everyone involved. The team produced the F-44 AA pulse rifles, a prototype version of the M41A rifles we see in Aliens. Of course, the tricky part of designing weapons for the film is balancing form with function. Dunkley explained how recoil, muzzle flash, smoke, and ammo counters all take up space, forcing them to make compromises on dimensions. Weta's crew worked to slim everything down without sacrificing realism, equipping the rifles with linear motor recoil, LED muzzle flashes, ammo counters with descending bars, and even a smoke ejection system adapted from a vaporizer. Pneumatic tech inside the barrel allowed the gun to vent smoke with each shot, giving the illusion of live fire. The auto-aiming effect, meanwhile, wasn't mechanical at all. It was done with pistons the actors controlled to mimic the weapon's adjusting itself, with monofilament string occasionally used on set for fine movements. The end result was a weapon that didn't just look authentic on camera, but felt like a genuine bridge in the evolution of colonial marine firepower. Creating the Facehuggers. The Facehuggers in Alien Romulus were brought to life with a mix of old tricks and new builds, pulling heavily from the methods James Cameron and Stan Winston's teams used back in Aliens. For the attack sequences, Weta Workshop relied on reverse photography, the same trick used in the MedLab scenes with Ripley and Newt. Joe Dunkley explained how they began with a facehugger already latched onto a victim, its tail coiled around the neck. The fingers were spring-loaded so puppeteers could release the tension and yank the creature off. Played in reverse, it looked like the hugger launched itself perfectly onto the face, landing harder and cleaner than any puppet thrown by hand could ever manage. It gave the moment an extra bit of violence without endangering the actor. Weta already had facehuggers in development for Alien Earth, so bringing that experience into Romulus made sense. Dunkley admitted that the team went back to basics by rewatching Stan Winston's school videos on how the original puppets were made, since those designs were still the gold standard. They then built a whole arsenal of huggers, including a fully animatronic hero version with control over each joint, remote-controlled ones for skittering across floors, a swimming model for underwater shots, and multiple variations for attacks. On top of that, they created lightweight, stunt-safe versions that could be thrown at actors without risk, tougher ones that could be launched across sets without breaking, silicone huggers for cryo-chamber sequences, and even rotting dead ones for background detail. According to Dunkley, it was Fede Alvarez's insistence on keeping things practical that gave them the time and freedom to get this detailed. Usually, production schedules don't allow for such elaborate preparation for physical builds, but here, they had the space to refine everything. The Renaissance Station mixes both tech levels together. So the Remus section has these CRT screens and grimy machines and big buttons, while the Romulus section, which was supposedly built later on, had the more expensive and technologically advanced equipment. You can see how Rook uses a state-of-the-art 3D holographic display that's seen in Ridley Scott's prequel films. Furthermore, the weaponry is also more advanced than the stuff seen in the hands of the Colonial Marines in the 1986 movie. K was inspired from The Last of Us Part 2. Director Alvarez later revealed that Kay, Isabella Merced's pregnant character, was actually inspired by Dina from The Last of Us Part 2. Interestingly enough, a few months before the release of Romulus, the Peruvian-American actress and singer was cast as none other than Dina in the second season of The Last of Us TV series. Inspiration behind Corbalan. The Corbalan's final look came together with the idea of it being an earth mover in space, as production designer Mahan Marshall described it. Its bulk and function were influenced by bulldozers and aerial cranes, heavy machinery built for work rather than style. Inside, the layout kept faith with the utilitarian tone of the earlier films. One end held the cargo bay with hibernation pods that led into a narrow corridor. Marshall explained this was a deliberate nod to the architecture, the bones of it, the shapes that defined the original Alien sets. The corridor stretched into the ship's suit room, a maintenance hub with gear for powering generators and large mechanisms designed to grip and secure containers. Marshall said the team drew inspiration from harbor cranes, keeping the design stark and functional. For the cockpit, Fede Alvarez pushed for maximum claustrophobia. To meet that vision, the set was built on a gimbal 5 meters off the ground, allowing the crew to simulate turbulence during flight sequences. Meanwhile, the suit room itself had practical elements like working doors and stairs, including a center door that opened so Kaylee Spaney could leap directly into the cargo bay 2 meters below. The zero-gravity sequence. One of the more elaborate sequences in the film has Rain crossing a corridor in zero gravity while streams of Xenomorph acid blood swirled dangerously around her. Originally, the moment was meant to be much smaller in scale. Visual effects supervisor Nelson Sepulveda explained that Fede Alvarez pushed for a more visceral approach. At first, it was just some alien blood in zero-G, nothing too intense, he said. But this is a big action sequence, and Rain's just had this major fight. The acid couldn't be background detail, and it had to feel like another character in the scene. It needed to be immediate, frightening, turbulent, and a very real obstacle. To get there, Sepulveda's Sydney team collaborated closely with ILM's San Francisco studio. The challenge was balancing spectacle with realism. Zero gravity meant that every movement had to be choreographed carefully, and the acid effect required layers of development to sell the danger without straying into something that felt magical or cartoonish. As Sepulveda put it, it was easy to veer into fantasy. We had to find a recipe that felt real, something that looked like a funnel of acid swirling in the set, and it had to hit with weight. Creating the Xenomorph. Bringing the Xenomorph to life in the film meant pulling out every tool available, from men in suits and Bunraku puppets to going full animatronic, and when the action demanded more fluidity, digital effects. Visual effects supervisor Nelson Sepulveda explained that while Legacy's puppets looked fantastic up close, there were limits. When the alien had to move in ways no practical build could, like in the elevator shaft sequence where it shot, catches Rain, or advances on her, we blended practical close-ups with CG, he said. The challenge was matching the models perfectly, so those cuts between real and digital were seamless. Still, Alvarez and Sepulveda didn't want the creature to lose its essence. They kept looking back at Big Chap from the original and the sequel for guidance. Alvarez's mantra was simple: the alien should feel creepy, not flashy. Overly fast or exaggerated movement would expose the effect as digital, so the team leaned into slower, scary motions like the deliberate crawl along walls and the pause before striking. As Sepulveda put it, the slower it moved, the stranger and more ominous it felt. Impossible, but grounded. Having Legacy's physical builds on set anchored the digital work. Seeing the creature under real lights gave the team the references they needed to replicate it convincingly, while ensuring the Xenomorph stayed faithful to its roots while terrifying in a way that felt tangible. The Drinking Bird. Early on in Alien Romulus, you must have spotted a drinking bird toy on one of the tables. Well, This toy was also seen in the original movie, as well as Alien 3 from 1992. We really love how Mr. Alvarez has picked up these tiny little Easter eggs from previous movies and spread them throughout Romulus like some kind of movie confetti. Aspen beer. Now, in one of the scenes from Romulus, we can see them drinking Aspen beer. This was also the drink that people from the Nostromo were drinking in Ridley Scott's original movie. Interestingly enough, the beer is actually produced by Weyland-Yutani. Needless to say, Weyland-Yutani is not just building better worlds, they're getting people drunk too. You wonder what other things the company produces. Leopards and jaguars. When it comes to how the Xenomorph should move, Fede Alvarez drew inspiration from big cats like leopards and jaguars. As VFX supervisor Eric Barba explained, their bodies twist and contort with power, but their heads remain locked onto the target, steady as if mounted on a gimbal. That unshakable focus gives the impression of something built to kill. Translating that into a practical puppet, though, wasn't easy. A man in a suit naturally lets his head wobble, and suddenly the menace is lost. Alvarez wasn't satisfied with that, so he pushed legacy effects to engineer gimbals inside the creature's head. That mechanical fix gave the Xeno a precision that felt unnerving. Its body could coil and lash while the head stayed eerily fixed on whatever it was hunting. When the first test came through, the difference was clear. What looked like a man in a suit before now looked like a living monster with its own terrifying intent. H.R. Giger and Dan O'Bannon's influence. The concept for the final monster can be traced back to a letter Dan O'Bannon wrote to H.R. Giger during the original Aliens production. In it, O'Bannon described what he called the alien's third mature phase. After leaving its host, he imagined the creature growing quickly to human size, becoming dangerously mobile, brutally strong, and fully capable of tearing someone apart. It would feed on human flesh and, in his words, should feel like a profane abomination. The producers at the time even floated the idea of making it resemble an oversized, deformed baby, something grotesque enough to stick in the viewer's mind. But ultimately, O'Bannon left the vision open to Giger, telling him to feel free to create his own design. A 7'7" actor played the Offspring. The Offspring was brought to life not through heavy CGI, but by casting someone whose physical presence alone could sell the part. Alvarez explained to Collider that he wanted the role played practically, so the team began looking for the right performer. That's when they found Robert Bob Roziski, a former Romanian college basketball player who stands at an incredible 7'7". Alvarez reached out directly, sending him an email asking if he'd like to appear in an Alien film, and Bob Roziski jumped at the chance. Once cast, most of the Offspring's look was achieved through extensive makeup work, which gave the creature a raw, scary presence on set. The only digital addition was the tail, which was created through CGI. By grounding the performance in Bob Roziski's natural frame and movements, Alvarez ensured that the Offspring felt tangible and believable. The Engineer Inspiration. The human Xenomorph Offspring was deliberately designed to echo the engineers seen in Prometheus and Alien Covenant, tying the prequels closer to the main series. The idea was to make it a true hybrid, a disturbing mix of human, engineer, and xenomorph traits. In the original test cut shown to producers, the creature didn't stay static. It visibly shifted as the xenomorph side began to take over. Its skull would stretch longer, its eyes faded until gone, and the design suggested a full transformation into something far more alien. But Ridley Scott wasn't convinced. He reportedly said he didn't love it, so the team scaled it back, settling on a version where the creature stays mostly unchanged throughout. Even so, subtle touches from that early vision remain. If you look closely, the Offspring's back ripples in certain shots, teasing the growth of the iconic dorsal pipes. View of the Hotel de Ville of Marseille during the Plague of 1720 by Michael Serre. At around the 29-minute mark, Andy, Tyler, and Bjorn pass through the Renaissance space station and come across a disturbing painting of a child suckling from the breast of its dead mother. The work is View of the Hotel de Ville of Marseille during the Plague of 1720 by Michael Serre, painted in 1721 after he personally witnessed the horrors of the epidemic while helping to clear corpses from the streets. Known as the Great Plague of Marseille, it was the last major outbreak of bubonic plague in Western Europe, wiping out 100,000 people, nearly half the city's population, in under 2 years. King Louis XV forced 700 people, mostly immigrants conscripted at gunpoint, to handle the cleanup and mass burials. Only 200 survived, though their sacrifice prevented an even greater catastrophe. The film uses this grim piece of history not only as an eerie set dressing, but as foreshadowing. The mother and child detail anticipates Kay's fate, killed by her genetically altered offspring who feeds on her before finishing the job. It also mirrors Andy's own moral dilemma of sacrificing Navarro to save Rain and the others, much like Louis XV's decision to send hundreds to their deaths so thousands more might live. Composition of the Xenomorph blood. When Bjorn takes a splash of Xenomorph acid to the chest, his torso explodes a moment later. It looks like a chestburster attack or a stab wound from behind, but it's neither. What actually happens is a chemical chain reaction between human blood and the alien acid. Rook explains that the Xenomorph's blood is likely a mix of hydrofluoric acid and sulfuric acid, both of which react with water in different ways. Hydrofluoric acid has a milder reaction, but sulfuric acid reacts violently, releasing heat in the process. Since more than half of blood volume is plasma, and plasma is mostly water, the acid effectively sets off a powerful exothermic reaction once it hits the bloodstream. In the chest cavity, where most of the body's blood pools, that kind of reaction would instantly flash boil a huge amount of fluid, creating the violent explosion effect seen in Bjorn. It's less body horror mystery and more gruesome chemistry at work. Nod to every movie! This film doesn't hide its lineage, and it pulls threads from every corner of the Alien saga, stitching them into one story. From Alien, we see the recovery of the Nostromo wreckage and its Xenomorph, while Rook mirrors Ash in both type and demeanor. Even the tech callbacks are there, right down to the diaphragmatic hatches and the familiar sound cues. 1986's Aliens bleeds through the hive battle with pulse rifles firing, cocoon victims, and the swarm of xenomorphs closing in. Andy, like Bishop, insists on artificial person, slips in Burke's busy little creatures, and even resembles Ripley's line against the Queen. Alien 3 surfaces in the close quarters terror. For instance, the alien inches from Rain's face, the twisted studio fanfare, and Rook's battered torso sparking back to life. Resurrection finds its mark in the finale with a newborn hybrid turning on its own mother. The prequels find their mention through the Black Mutagen, the Engineers, and Shaw's doomed work, and in the refined, weaponized mutagen, birthing xenomorphs with faster growth and stronger healing, like precursors to David's protomorphs. Ripley's Narcissus shuttle. At around the 1 hour mark, when Kay is trapped in the chamber with a xenomorph and Rain begs Andy to open the door, a sharp eye might notice Ripley's Narcissus shuttle docked in the background. Fede Alvarez later confirmed this wasn't a throwaway detail, since Weyland-Yutani had already salvaged the Nostromo's wreckage and even recovered the ejected xenomorph. Tracking down the Narcissus with its beacon was easy. The implication is that Ripley and Jonesy were briefly kept on the Romulus before the station's destruction. Once everything went down, the Narcissus was released back into space, which explains how it drifted alone for decades until the start of Aliens. Alvarez asked the VFX crew to show the shuttle slipping out as the Corbalan escapes, a subtle nod more than a highlight. Weta FX supervisor Daniel McCarran explained the approach by saying that Easter eggs work best when they don't shout for attention, but reward fans who catch them on repeat viewings. Real-time countdowns. At around 1 hour and 4 minutes, when Mother says they only have 30 minutes until impact, the film is in real time and impact occurs just as the system calculated. This was also true for the ending of Cameron's Aliens. Clones of Big Chap. Before release, fans picked apart the trailers and guessed that the original alien, nicknamed Big Chap from the 1979 film, might return as the film's main monster. The theory wasn't entirely off. In the opening sequence, the Big Chap is recovered near the wreckage of the Nostromo, but rather than hunting the crew, it becomes a science experiment. Its corpse is used for genetic tinkering aboard the Romulus, sparking the chain of horrors that drives the plot. At some point, it broke loose, rampaged through the station, and was eventually put down for good. By the time the main story takes shape, the creature is already dead, its body grotesquely suspended from the ceiling with Ripley's harpoon still lodged in its back, a direct visual link to the end of the first film. The real enemies are its twisted offspring, genetically altered clones engineered from the Big Chap's DNA. In other words, the original beast isn't the terror this time, but its legacy is what fuels the nightmare. Reason behind changing the Chestburster sequence. Fede Alvarez explained in an Entertainment Weekly interview why he changed the Chestburster scene, one of the franchise's most iconic beats. Traditionally, once the creature ripped out of its host, it darted off immediately, leaving behind only shock and horror. Alvarez wanted something different, something he felt was closer to reality. His version has the newborn linger, weak and exhausted, almost trying to recognize its mother. He told his puppeteers to treat the moment like a nature documentary, have the creature raise its head, search for scent, behaved like a newborn animal rather than a monster on autopilot. To him, that made the moment more disturbing and believable. The commitment to realism extended beyond the creature itself. Instead of relying on shaky cam tricks to sell the chaos of a spacecraft colliding with the station, Alvarez had the entire cockpit set mounted on a massive gimbal that literally shook the actors inside. It was violent enough that the stunt doubles were used for safety, but the effect meant every slam and jolt was authentic. Alvarez threw himself into the gimbal with his cast, clinging to his monitor as the set rattled around him. He described it as the best theme park ride, and his enthusiasm turned what could have been another routine alien birth scene into something both grounded and grotesque. Plagiarius Praepotens. At around 44 minutes, Rook refers to the implanted Chestburster as Plagiarius Praepotens, Latin for powerful mimic, and the adult creatures as Xenomorph XX-121, much like how Facehugger and Chestburster were never spoken in Alien, but became fan shorthand after appearing in production notes. These names also come from the extended universe. Plagiarius Praepotens first appeared in Alex White's novel, Alien: The Cold Forge, where it described the mutagenic fluid a facehugger injects into the host to form an embryo. Xenomorph XX-121 was introduced in James A. Moore's Alien: Sea of Sorrows and S.D. Perry's Alien: The Weyland-Yutani Report as the official classification of the original creature. People quickly adopted it to distinguish the classic alien from variants like the neomorphs introduced later. What started as deep-cut terminology and tie-in media has now been pulled into the films themselves, essentially canonizing names that were once confined to novels and lore guides. Andy's backstory. In a 2024 interview with The Hollywood Reporter, Fede Alvarez revealed Andy's backstory in more detail. In the film, Bjorn dismisses him as Weyland-Yutani damaged goods that your dad found in the trash, while Rook calls his model the backbone of the company's old colonization efforts. Alvarez explained that Andy is an ND-255 unit, a line of synthetics once sent out to colonies as both company presence and workforce. Over time, they became outdated, and Andy was one of the many decommissioned models discarded. Rain's father salvaged him, repaired what he could, and effectively made him part of the household. Rain grew up with Andy, and their bond feels more like family than ownership. Alvarez points to the early exchange between them. Andy repeats a joke, and Rain reminds him she laughed at it when she was 12, which speaks about their long history. For Rain's parents, both dying of lung disease from the mines, Andy offered peace of mind, someone to watch over their daughter once they were gone. The irony is that instead of being her protector, Andy often becomes more of a burden, requiring her to give as much care as she gets. Alvarez liked the tension in that setup. It makes their connection more complicated than a simple girl and her robot story, giving their relationship both warmth and frustration in equal measure. Interestingly, this is one of the most important aspects about the script that Ridley Scott and his Scott-free production house liked. The X-ray sequence. In the scene where Navarro scans her chest with the X-ray wand and discovers the Chestburster, the effect came together through a mix of practical tradition and digital upgrades. Visual effects supervisor Nelson Sepulveda explained that when the creature crew arrived to handle the Chestburster, the energy on set totally changed, and everyone knew they were getting into one of the franchise's more memorable moments. The goal was to honor the original approach while adding something new. That something came from Fede Alvarez's idea of showing the process from the inside. To pull it off, the team digitally built Navarro's entire internal structure, bones, muscles, veins, organs, then researched the look of real X-rays to give it authenticity. They layered in compositing and animation to sync with the physical puppet, breaking ribs and forcing the creature through in a way that matched the brutality fans expect. Sepulveda described it as a brief moment, but one that stood out because it gave audiences a fresh perspective on a familiar horror, with the Chestburster not just ripping out, but revealed first as a hidden presence under the skin. Biblical references. Kay's necklace is a miraculous medal, a Catholic devotional piece that carries the image of the Virgin Mary. Kay mentions that she's pregnant from some asshole, leaving the child's father unknown, yet her story bends towards a darker mirror of Mary's. Later, when she injects herself with a vaccine derived from the black mutagen first seen in Prometheus, a substance tied to the engineers, humanity's supposed creators, the connection deepens. The child inside her becomes less her own and more the offspring of a higher power, twisted into something designed by forces far older and more alien than man. When the hybrid is finally revealed, its physical form carries a scary resemblance to the engineers themselves, underscoring that link. The religious thread doesn't stop there. The film's title calls back to Romulus, the mythological founder of Rome, said to be born of Rhea, a virgin, and Mars, the god of war. By tying Kay's pregnancy to myth and faith, the film frames her as both a victim and a vessel, someone whose body delivers a new kind of messiah, not divine, but born from the same black substance that wiped out worlds. Eileen Wu disliked the facehugger sequence. Eileen Wu admitted that shooting her facehugger sequence was one of the most exhausting parts of the film. The scene took 4 days, with Wu doing much of the stunt work herself. On the first day, she had to endure heavy wire work, flung across the room with her head snapping back, something she'd never experienced before. She joked that she was surprised her neck held up after that. The tougher moments, though, came when the facehugger was latched onto her. Wu explained that lying still for hours while the rest of the scene unfolded around her was far more draining than she expected. Director Fede Alvarez added another layer of difficulty with his insistence on realism down to her breathing. He told her that her breath had to sync with the facehugger's air sacs, which expand and deflate to keep the host alive while implanting the embryo. Wu said the precision of holding her breath when the bladders filled, then inhaling when they emptied, made the process intense. Alvarez stressed that this was for the hardcore fans who knew the creature's biology inside and out and would catch any inconsistency. The Offspring could have had wings. Concept artist Dane Hallett shared that the Offspring almost looked very different. At one stage, it even had wings sprouting from the body. He explained that in an early version, the material Kay injected into herself altered her unborn child so drastically that it transformed into something far removed from the final creature. The winged design progressed all the way to previs before being dropped and replaced with the vision that ended up on screen. Hallett admitted that the process was stressful, worrying that he might be responsible for a design fans would reject as an unnecessary mutation in the Alien universe. He worked hard to justify its existence, giving it purpose and presence while trying to honor the long design legacy that began with Giger's original Alien. In his words, he wanted it to feel like an ode to all that had come before it. Ultimately, the team decided against the winged version, and Hallett admitted relief that the final cut leaned into something closer to tradition. Still, he released his early sketches showing how the creature was initially imagined clinging to the hull of the Corbalan. Eric Barba regretted using CGI on one Offspring scene. In an interview with Screen Rant, VFX supervisor Eric Barba recalled a tough call the team had to make with Robert Bobrowski's performance as the Offspring. Bobrowski, standing at 7'7", had been filmed in a practical sequence where the creature drops on all fours and stalks down a hallway through drifting cold gas. Barba remembered the silence on set as everyone watched the silhouette of this enormous figure chasing Kay, broken only by gasps of those present behind the camera. It was that effective. The shots, done entirely in camera, looked incredible and captured a level of fear that felt natural and immediate. But due to story and editing choices, the sequence had to be cut, and Weta was tasked with digitally recreating the moment so that it could live on in a different form. Barba stressed that having Bobrowski physically there gave the actors something tangible to react to, which elevated their performances. His alien proportions alone made him scary, and once he was in costume, dripping with goop, the effect was even stronger. He didn't just look monstrous, he leaned into it, moving in ways that amplified the unease. Though the final cut relied on CGI, Barba was clear that the authenticity and presence Bobrowski brought to the set made a lasting impact on how the creature came across. Rain's final fight resembles Ripley's. Rain's final confrontation deliberately looks similar to Ripley's final stand in Alien from 1979. Stripped down to her underwear before suiting up, she faces the last creature and ejects it into space. The sequence even borrows from an idea that never made it into the original film. Ridley Scott had once planned for Ripley and the alien to both be pulled out of the shuttle when the hatch opened. Ripley would have dangled outside, tethered by a safety cable, while the alien clung to the other side. She would then fight her way back inside and finish it off using the shuttle's engines. The idea was abandoned due to time constraints, but the echoes of that scrapped concept live on here. The Offspring's death sequence. Cornered by the Xenomorph, Andy, Tyler, and Rain retreat into a lab deep in the station. Tyler hands Rain a crash course on pulse rifles, but Andy warns her that firing so close to the outer hull would be suicide because one spray of acid blood could eat through and trigger explosive decompression. That danger becomes the key to ending Kay's engineer-human Xenomorph hybrid Offspring. Rain kicks over its acidic cocoon in the cargo bay, burning through the floor and blowing a hole out into space. The sudden breach drags both her and the hybrid towards the void. She manages to hold on, clinging to a rope anchored inside the Corbalan, while the Offspring isn't so lucky. Its tail stays hooked to the cargo pod, giving Rain just enough time to eject the pod completely, hurling the creature into Jackson's star's planetary rings. Yvaga isn't gonna be so great. Fede Alvarez has hinted that Yvaga 3 may not be the paradise it's made out to be in the film. After wrapping production, he and his team found themselves debating what Rain and Andy would face if they ever reached the planet. Alvarez explained, "Is Yvaga going to be great, or is it a terrible place? We tend to believe it's probably a terrible place that they think is great and fantasize about." The idea quickly spiraled into speculation about what comes next, with Alvarez admitting that within minutes they realized, oh, that sounds like a sequel. Instead of being the promised land Rain dreams of, Yvaga 3 might turn out to be another hostile setting in the alien universe, making their supposed escape less of a happy ending and more of a setup for the next nightmare. The Burned Mummified Alien. Shane Mahan, now one of the heads at Legacy Effects, usually spends his time managing teams of artists rather than sculpting himself. But on this film, he carved out time to get back to the bench. He revealed that there was one piece he couldn't resist tackling personally, the one with the head of the burned mummified Xenomorph, the same creature originally aboard the Nostromo in Alien. Mahan explained that he would often take the sculpture home at night or sneak in on weekends to work on it, treating it almost like a personal project. For someone who had spent much of his recent career overseeing others, getting to shape such an iconic piece of alien lore with his own hands was something he just wasn't going to pass up.
Yo.
Bjorn's racism against synthetics. Bjorn's deep mistrust of synthetics comes from a backstory where robots were allowed to bend Asimov's 3 laws of robotics if it meant saving more lives overall. In his case, 3 miners were left to die so that 12 others could be rescued, and that scar fueled his anti-robot fanaticism. This doesn't just explain his hatred, it foretells and justifies Andy's actions later in the film. When Navarro tries to leave the station, Andy stops her, correctly suspecting she's carrying a chestburster. Later, when Kay begs to be let through a locked door with a Xenomorph on her heels, Andy refuses, following the same cold calculation. His programming isn't about sentiment, it's about survival math, a logic rooted in the same principles that once made Bjorn hate synthetics in the first place. First appearance of green facehuggers. This film is the first on-screen appearance of green facehuggers, a design element that actually traces back to the very first Alien. In 1979, the plan was for the creature to have a green coloration, but the facehugger ended up with a pale flesh tone instead. Dan O'Bannon had argued that the green look was inventive and distinctive, but ultimately the decision was made to leave it unpainted. That original idea lingered in the background for decades until it was finally revived here. By bringing in the green variation, the film not only pays homage to an abandoned concept from the franchise's beginnings, but also broadens the visual palette of the Alien life cycle, letting fans finally see what might have been in Ridley Scott's original. Music from previous films. At about an hour and 12 minutes in, Rook brings up the failed Prometheus mission, and over his words, you can hear Elizabeth Shaw's theme from Prometheus 2012. Earlier, around the 3-minute mark, as the Weyland-Yutani crew extracts the fossil of the original alien from 1979, the audio slips in the exact sound effect used when Dallas was grabbed in that first movie. This time it's blended with the hum of the extraction laser, a subtle but unmistakable echo of that earlier terror. Bjorn's alternate death sequence. An alternate version of Bjorn's death was filmed, but ultimately cut. In that version, after being injured and trapped in the cocoon, he would have been dragged back beneath it and impaled by the scorched Xenomorph's tail. What audiences see in the final cut plays out differently. Bjorn gets his eye pierced at close range, then drops under the cocoon where he's finished off by a burst of acid blood. Both versions underline the same fate, but the deleted scene leaned more on the brutality of the Xenomorph itself, while the released one highlights the grotesque efficiency of its biology. Rain is Ripley's spiritual successor. At around an hour and 22 minutes into the film, Rain climbs back down the elevator shaft to reach Andy, who's badly injured. The way she moves, her outline, stance, and the determined pace she takes directly resemble Ripley's entrance into the hive to rescue Newt in Aliens. This makes Rain a spiritual successor to Ripley as she steps into danger not out of duty, but out of loyalty to someone she refuses to abandon. Alternate design of the Offspring. Storyboard artist Santiago Vecino once revealed an alternate design for the Offspring on her Instagram. This version was close to the final look but had one major difference: long black hair. The addition gave the creature a more grotesque presence, but it lacked the unnerving quality the team wanted. Instead of pushing it into that uncanny, almost human territory, the hair made it feel more like a grotesque variant. The idea was dropped, leaving the final design bald, a choice that better captured the hybrid's eerie balance between human and alien. The film was shot chronologically. Hard drives containing the IMAX version were shipped to cinemas under the pseudonym Clones. Romulus is the second Alien film to gross over $100 million domestically after Prometheus. Rain's full name is Marie Rains Carradine. Archie Renault also auditioned for the role that ultimately went to David Johnson. So yeah, these were 50 bits of trivia from Alien Romulus. Let us know if we missed any bits of trivia that you know about, because we definitely want to hear them. Otherwise, thanks for watching, stay safe out there, and have a marvelous day.